Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another video, and just like last week I've got another brilliant guest on to talk about Chelsea and all things football. If you're on the Chelsea community online, you probably know who this guest is. He's been really influential, he's joined the debate and he's grown his own channel and his podcast over time. Alex Goldberg, welcome, thank you for coming on. How are you doing?
I appreciate it, Daniel. Thanks for having me. Doing well. Hate the international break, but other than that, doing well and happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely. The international break, it's not as bad as it used to be, and I think that's predominantly for me with England. It used to be so dour with England in the past, and I think because England have improved, I don't know how you feel about your national team, but it's because I think it's improved and there's a little bit more positivity around England. They aren't as dour as they used to be, but I can understand it's a bit frustrating. We've just literally started the season and then it cuts off, and you're like, oh, like it's a bit frustrating.
This is the worst. This is the worst international break because you get teased with football, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's done for 2 weeks. So I mean, I hate all of them to be honest, but this one is by far the worst.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about your channel and well, the channel you set up and your influence within the Chelsea community online, the sort of grown. Is it fair to say over the last, I say, over a year? It feels like at this point, at least since you sort of popped up on sort of my timeline, and then you grew, and then obviously started your channel, then started the podcast, which has had some amazing guests on it. Um, how do you feel as part of the Chelsea community online, especially coming from the perspective of an, I guess the best term, an international fan to Chelsea? Um, how do you feel the quality of debate has been at Chelsea? Because I wrote a lot of articles for the Chelsea Echo last year about this and how it was quite negative under Sarri, quite toxic. There was clearly a divide between sections of the fan base. Do you think any of that has improved? How have you gazed at it with your time? Do you think it's more positive than negative? Your opinions on that?
Yeah, so I mean, under Sarri, it was a toxic season. It really was. Obviously, Chelsea started well under Sarri, but you right away had match-going fans not really warming up to him, and that seeped onto Twitter and I think onto social media a little bit. But then obviously you had the exact opposite of people so put off by those match-going fans that were so unwelcoming that they went above and beyond to be pro-Sarri, and eventually started a Sarri cult. So you had two extremes last season, and it wasn't fun. I mean, I'm not saying the season wasn't fun. It ended fantastic, but still, it was not a great year for the Chelsea fan base, in my opinion. Now, I've found that all of these seasons are having a trickle over effect. So, like Antonio Conte and how messy his departure was impacted how Sarri was treated, and now Sarri leaving Chelsea, and the fact that some people still don't understand that Sarri chose to leave Chelsea. Some people are convinced that if Chelsea had treated him better, he would have stayed. So you have people who are bitter. And you have people that are bitter and now all of a sudden being pretty unwelcoming to Frank Lampard. Now, majority are obviously welcoming Frank Lampard, one of Chelsea's greatest ever players. However, Daniel, there's this underlying tone and vibe to some of these people who are really, really pro-Sarri. And by the way, I liked Sarri. I was just very in the middle, and I got very frustrated with him. But these people who are really pro-Sarri, who are saying, oh, yeah, no, well, Lampard, I'll give him the chance. No problem. I'll treat Lampard fairly. They would never want Chelsea to lose. They would never want Chelsea to lose, but it almost feels like they're ready to pick at things. And one thing that I'm so done with, Daniel, is this quote that people will say, where was this energy with Sarri? When people are maybe giving Lampard the benefit of the doubt, people are maybe giving Lampard an excuse or cutting him a break. I find a lot of people saying, where was this energy with Sarri? Sarri didn't get those breaks. And it creates toxic conversation, in my opinion. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, I don't feel great about the Chelsea fan base and the debate going on these days. I don't think it's at a great point. But I also think it's kind of incomplete right now because the season has started. We've only had a handful of games. And it's kind of really hard to figure out where Chelsea are. There have been some good moments. So I think more good moments with 3 points and not 1 point will actually maybe turn some of these people a little bit more positive and see the project, see the future and the foundation. But if it's just going to be a draw and then 3 points and then a loss and then a draw, I don't see the debate in this fan base getting any better. So right now I'm worried for it, but I think it can improve with improved results.
I do agree. I think I was quite pessimistic at the back end of last season with some of the debate. I think that was mostly down to certain people, online personalities is what I refer to it as, that tried to fuel the flames of that. And I think that the point you make, unfortunately, without getting too pretentious and taking this away from football and Chelsea, it sort of is a representation, of our society at the moment and the debate within our society at the moment. It's divisive. It's black or white. It's there's no middle ground anymore. Like you have to, especially a place like Twitter, which feels like a dumpster fire in terms of where you can have an actual debate about things. It's a reasoned, rational sort of in-depth discussion. Unfortunately, just isn't a popular thing at the moment. And I think Chelsea's fan base, as I'm sure with many fans across the world with their clubs, will probably have similar issues. So I do agree with you on that. And I think my quote about this is this. I think I'm going to repeat it a lot of times this season in regards to Lampard, is I have no patience for impatience with Lampard, and the project he's trying to build. And I guess the thing that comes into this and links into this is Chelsea as a club, the culture. I talk a lot about the culture of impatience and short-termism that has benefited the club very much in the last 15 years since Roman's taken over, and we've had amazing success as a club with trophies. But it feels like it's time for a change and a new era at Chelsea. Do you think Lampard can change that culture? Do you think we are only so early into his reign, but do you think Lampard has this chance to change that culture into something more positive and longer term?
Yeah, definitely. Totally. I think he absolutely has the chance. Will he? I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I think he has a good chance to take it a little bit further, because all he needs is a string of wins where you're supposed to win. And it needs to happen somewhat soon, or else, people can really overreact. So 3 points that you should be getting, like the Sheffield United game in the future when you play Brighton at home, you got to get those 3 points. But then I think what will really improve the culture is stealing points. And I know some Chelsea fans, they hate that I even have to say stealing points, because Chelsea are used to being top dogs. So they really should never view it as stealing points. And that's one of my pet peeves right now, is so many people are like, Chelsea are supposed to be competing for trophies year in, year out. I don't want to celebrate youngsters making debuts. Listen, I think people need to accept reality that Chelsea are in a little bit of a rebuild here, and it happens to even the top teams. So in order to improve the culture, you got to get those 3 points when you're supposed to get them. But where that camaraderie and I think the energy and vibe will really improve, and I know it's already pretty good at Stamford Bridge. I mean, even though they haven't been good at home so far, I know, from people who have been at the grounds, they've said that it still feels vastly different from last season. But if you can start stealing points against the Liverpool, or when you do face Manchester City, or, fine, even away, if you got all 3 points against Wolves, that would dramatically, I think, change a lot of people's opinion on what's going on right now. So I think the vibe can change pretty quickly if people can see Frank Lampard maybe overachieving, because you have so many people, Daniel, saying that Chelsea's squad right now is not great, and it's not what we have been used to from Chelsea. And maybe right now with so many players injured, that's true. But if Frank Lampard can overachieve a bit with their squad, I think people will very quickly realize, all right, wait a minute, there's something there as Frank Lampard being a manager. And by the way, I think people need to start viewing Frank Lampard as youth as well. He's a youth manager. So just like a young player, project on Lampard. Now, some people have a problem that we hired a youth manager, but get past it. It happened. So I think they need to see signs. So signs from Lampard that he really has a good future as a manager, and then signs from young players. That's the other thing, Daniel, that will really change the vibe is, you have a lot of people who are anti-youth at this point, it feels like. Now, it might be just because you have obnoxious people like me who are so loudly pro-youth, but whatever. I think if these results keep having young players score, like a Tammy Abraham and a Mason Mount and HUDSON-ODOI when he comes back, I think that will start to make some people turn from doubters to at least temporary believers, because imagine if Chelsea had this many points to this point and your goal scorers were Pedro and Willian. So I think a little bit more of Lampard showing signs, stealing some points here and there and winning the games you're supposed to, and still having youth be at the core of it. I think that's the recipe right now to really improve this vibe and energy with Lampard going forward.
Yeah, I think lots of good points there and lots to unpack. I think that it's interesting the point you make about people not being invested in the youth or being pessimistic towards Lampard. And I think the unfortunate thing is a lot of this, sometimes you hear it a lot, Twitter fans or online fans is probably the phrase that gets used. I have to say from personal experience of, I was at the bridge for the Sheffield United game, and I think there is I think it's a little bit too simplistic to say that only fans who, let's say, are on Twitter, on social media, who express their opinions are reactionary and ultra critical of the team. There are people who go to games regularly who are as critical of the players that I find. It's not. So when I ask you about the culture, I think it's as much to do with the crowd at the bridge as it is to do with anything online. And the crowd at the bridge is the most important thing in terms of when you look at the outlook to the rest of the football world. Especially at times last season with Sarri, it's a bad look if the hard and lower is shouting abuse at your manager and the away crowd is shouting abuse at your manager on a regular basis. But I definitely feel there has been an improvement there, and I think that with signs like, as you say, if we're able to beat Liverpool in a couple of weeks, and signs like the Super Cup, the amount of positivity after the Super Cup, I think really was just heartening to me that this team can be a team that Chelsea fans can fall in love with, and really connect with on quite a deeper level. I think the next thing to come to, of course, is Chelsea's new American, Christian Pulisic. And big signing from Borussia Dortmund last January. I was really happy with the signing, especially because I think people forget Liverpool were in for him the summer before, and he could have gone to a lot of other top clubs. And I like the profile of the signing in terms of a younger player that can grow into a really good player. Christian Pulisic, how much does he mean to American fans of Chelsea and to America as a country to be in one of the top clubs in English football? Just your impression and the story of Christian Pulisic and his growth and his rise to play at Chelsea.
Yeah, so I think maybe I am a good person to speak on it because I'm actually not a huge United States men's national team fan. Obviously I want my country to be good in the sport, and I'll probably turn out to be a little bit of a bandwagon fan if they become good, but I don't tune into all the games. I don't. I am a little bit different than maybe your average listener or viewer in terms of how I got into the sport. So my first exposure was Chelsea, not really the United States men's national team. So with Pulisic, he clearly has a fairly big impact on fans of the sport here in the United States because he's simply the best player. He is simply the best player, and he makes the United States relevant. The fact that at 16 years old, really 15, he made that move out to Borussia Dortmund, a legitimate European club, that made fans here in the United States take him seriously because he didn't go to the MLS. So right away, when a player doesn't go to the MLS and they go and play in Europe, fans here are, unless they're a huge MLS fan, even if they are, they're going to take it more seriously. So even Matt Miazga being signed by Chelsea, that's still kind of cool to a fan here because it's like, okay, well, at least he's playing at Chelsea and not at an MLS club. So with Pulisic, the fact that he did prove himself at Borussia Dortmund, he didn't set the league on fire, but he proved himself. He had good moments for sure. And the fact that he's now at 20 years old, the same age of a Mason Mount, but it feels like Pulisic's been in the game forever and ever and ever. The fact that he's been signed, and like you mentioned, Liverpool, other clubs were in for him. It's not like Chelsea took that big of a reach in acquiring him. How much of an impact can he have on football in America? It's hard to know. If he does well for Chelsea, a massive one. A massive one, because the sports coverage here is obviously pretty widespread with all the sports in the United States, but the Premier League gets covered really, really well by NBC Sports here in the United States. So Chelsea are already, it feels like Manchester United are still the biggest club, obviously. Like if they were all on at the same time, Manchester United are probably going to get that slot unless it's like Manchester United versus a crap team and then it's Chelsea versus City. But it already feels like people are catering to Chelsea because Pulisic is on Chelsea. But there's still a lot riding on it, because if he just completely fails, then it'll be a bad look, because he's actually failing on a bigger stage. He's failing with a lot of eyes on him now at Chelsea. But I think if he shows progression, Daniel, it'll be good, and it can only get better. If he can even just show signs this season of, all right, wait a minute, there's something there, and he can belong in this league. I don't think he needs to have a great first season in the Premier League. He just has to show signs, like a lot. I mean, I'm kind of being redundant. Lampard has to show signs. Mount and Abraham and HUDSON-ODOI and Reece James, they have to show signs. They don't have to tear the league apart, but they have to show legitimate signs like there's something there. I think Pulisic totally falls into place with that. So, I mean, it's kind of a big separate storyline, but I take comfort as a Chelsea fan, and I would assume you do and all Chelsea fans do, that I don't think Pulisic looks at it like America's watching him and he's got the weight of a whole entire nation on his shoulders. Seems like a pretty grounded kid, and he already dealt with that pressure when he was in Germany of everybody watching him. So I'm not worried about that. I think if Pulisic were to fail in the Premier League, he's failing in the Premier League because he's failing in the Premier League. Maybe he's just not cut out for it. He has to gain strength. His father even said that. But I don't think it'll be because of the pressure. So I'm excited to see if he can continue to show more and more signs. I think right now he's kind of been like, he's had a good moment and then he's disappeared. And I think that with more time, he'll probably get more consistent. But yeah, he could have a massive impact on the sport in general. Forget the United States. If he is a success at Chelsea, he'll make the sport bigger in the United States, which then you kind of know that makes the sport bigger in general. But yeah, it'll be interesting. There's obviously always an extra storyline with Pulisic rather than just how he played.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw him live was at Gladbach, the final pre-season game, and seeing him in the flesh, I thought he played really well that day and he really impressed me. And of course, a couple of days earlier against Salzburg, he had a real good impact in that game. And he's already, naturally, because of a club like Chelsea, there's already been questions asked of him. But I think we forget, as you pointed out, his age. And Lampard has expressed similar. He is the similar age of the other players like Mason and Tammy, even younger than some of them, who are breaking into the team. And I think just because of, I think the price tag obviously is usually the thing that props up people's expectations, but he's still got a long way to go. And I love the fact of how young he is and how he can develop at Chelsea. And it's going to be interesting overall with his development, I think, at the club. Clearly needs to bulk up in certain ways. Like I remember Hazard, when he came into the league, had similar issues, but under Jose, he was able to bulk up and ride challenges and ride the physicality. But, you know, he's Pulisic now was much younger than when Hazard arrived at Chelsea. So I think there's room to grow with Pulisic. And I remember watching a ESPN documentary about him, came from Hershey, played in teams older than him and had to deal with that pressure and had to deal with playing with bigger kids than him and that physicality. So I definitely think he's got the character to deal with it and hopefully the talent as well. Another player that has become synonymous with your account, of course, is Mason Mount. Mason Mount Monday. It's quite funny. We're recording this on a Monday. Just got a chance for England at the weekend, which was great to see, and I'm sure we'll again under Southgate. He's been a revelation is probably the wrong word, because if you've been watching Mount, you know his talent. But I have to be honest, back in May, or even back in like June or July, when we were starting to think that Lampard was going to come in as manager, if you would have said to me Mason Mount's going to be starting the season and he's going to get ahead of other players, I would have doubted it. But the way he's come in and just looks like a first team player, looks like a player who absolutely deserves to be in Chelsea starting 11. For someone who's followed his career and someone who's a big admirer of his, what have you made of Mason Mount's start to the season and his development as a player?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't hide obviously that I'm a big fan of Mason Mount. And listen, in all sports, I've always been somebody who kind of likes to look at the next generation. I'm always just interested in who's going to be tomorrow's next star. But I've made mistakes in doing that in every sport. When I look at, I'm not a scout, but I feel like I maybe have a decent judge of who's got it. And I made mistakes. I mean, I made mistakes with Charlie Musonda. I made mistakes with many young players where I just look at the talent. So the reason why I rate Mason Mount so damn highly is not really his talent. He obviously has very good talent. He's got good technical ability. He has plenty of talent, but it's what's between the ears. I mean, it's the fact that he doesn't look phased when he keeps progressing in his young career. Like for Chelsea in the academy, he was phenomenal. I mean, so all the people that we know in terms of top Chelsea youngsters, he played with, and he was often the best guy in the pitch, or at least top three, and usually a captain. And when he played for England youth teams, he was usually the best or one of the best. So he has just always been one of the top youngsters. And then he goes, and this is, so I obviously was a fan of him then, but not like a massive fan because there was only so much I could be a fan of. But then he goes to Vitesse, and I'm obviously intrigued. I want to see how he can prove himself. And didn't really get in the first few months of the season. And then he gets in, and he was incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. He tore that league apart. The same league that Frankie de Jong and Matthias de Ligt and all these players that we gush over, the same league that they play in, he bossed. And by the way, he was abroad. He was not at home. Those players are from there. So that was extra special to me. So you saw, once again, all right, he's progressing. So then he makes the very controversial move to some of going to Derby County when he really had offers to go to better places. Could have gone to the Bundesliga. Now we know it was a great idea because maybe going to Derby is literally also why he's now starting in Chelsea's team because of Lampard. But I feel like so many people misviewed how his season was at Derby. I think for most people he had a good season at Derby. Certainly not a bad or average. Maybe not an exceptional, but a good one. And he had to learn things. He had to improve his game in other areas. He became a proper midfielder last year in the championship, like a true proper midfielder. And I just feel like it was another step forward for him. He tested himself in a dirty, gritty league. But, Daniel, for a lot of, I feel cheap saying this, but I'll say it, for a lot of Twitter fans who would rather watch YouTube comps and really would rather just look at stats and statistical websites to make their judgments, he didn't have a ridiculous statistical season. He scored and he assisted, but he didn't set the world on fire. So they just saw a player who might not be worth the hype. But if you were watching, he actually improved as a player. He polished himself. And yeah, now has he had a little bit extra advantage by having Lampard come with him to Chelsea? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think he's handled it really well. And I'm just not surprised that he's handled it well because, once again, I come back to it, what's between the ears. Nothing ever seems too fast for him. It seems like the game he can read pretty well, so everything's slowed down for him. And, Daniel, I think the number one thing that I'm really impressed with by him and that I was even surprised with and that's saying a lot because obviously I'm a huge fan of his, is the fact that he's looked so good wherever he's been put. Now, we know he can play the 10 role or the 8 role, but the fact that he could do a job at left wing against a Trent Alexander-Arnold when he came in the Super Cup and against Max Aarons, another good young right back for Norwich City, the fact that he could really fill in those spots really impresses me. Once again, shows his football IQ. And it also, and I think I actually said this I might have said this to Yannick, who I know you've had on your show. I said it to somebody. He's becoming, maybe Joe Tweedy, if you know Joe Tweedy, doesn't matter. He's becoming actually one of the most invaluable Chelsea players. And I'm not at all going overboard by saying that, because what I mean by invaluable is now he can cover so many spots. And we know when Loftus-Cheek comes back and HUDSON-ODOI comes back, they can't play every game. They're injured. They're still getting off a very serious injury. Lampard's going to have to rotate those guys. And he's probably going to rotate Pulisic just to keep easing Pulisic in. And Pedro can't play every game. So all of a sudden, Mason Mount really is a very important player in a variety of roles. And I think he has the mentality to handle it. So, yeah, I just think this is going to be another season of Mason Mount progression. And I love the Mason Mount doubters. Honestly, I think they keep me energized every day. But I actually think there'll be less Mason Mount doubters in a few months, and maybe a lot less.
I think you spoke about his loan moves, which really helped to develop him and utilised, and Chelsea showing that utilising the loan system in a proper way. And I think similar trajectory for Ruben when he went on loan to Crystal Palace. And I think as a player, how much that helped him, and maybe a later stage, of course, to Mason. But I think that Mason, I love seeing him out on the wing. And I think personally, for me, from what I've seen already, I think that's a favoured position for me. Obviously, I'm sure he would love to be the number 8, the number 10. and maybe he'll grow into that. But as you've expressed, when Ruben comes back, who I'm a big fan of, the best 11, which already people have been doing, you think if you want to get all your best players on the pitch, it's good to have a player like Mount in a 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 that can go out wide, and Lampard can have a lot of attacking options if he chooses to, which I think is quite exciting for Chelsea fans this year. There's a lot of players that can cover a few positions, and he can set it up in several ways depending on the opposition, depending on what he wants to do in that particular game. And Mason, I hope as with all things, I really dislike when people have been comparing him to Frank and to other players. I really hate comparisons on young players because I just think it's so detrimental to their growth. And it's always the thing, I think I tweeted it the other day, I was like, when Eden Hazard came in, who was he the next of? No, Eden Hazard was Eden Hazard. He just was Eden Hazard. He was the best Chelsea player at his era. Same with Frank, same with Didier, same with a lot of players. They are just the player they are. I really hate comparisons because I don't think they are really beneficial. You can maybe put a case that, Mason's a goal-scoring midfielder, but he is completely different to Frank in his stature, in his the way he plays the game. Lampard didn't have even the same pace, but both of them can be really beneficial to Chelsea. And I just hope, as we were speaking about earlier and you were touching on earlier, there's patience with Mason because he is, at the moment, the season's fresh, the sun's still out. It's when we get into the grind now of the Champions League, the League Cup, the especially those winter months where a lot of these young players are going to have learning moments this season, and my hope is that people stick behind them during those tough periods and can see the positives of their game, which I really think is the big thing to think about this season. Just on the youth of this season, of course, Reece James, I spoke to Yannick about that last week, of course, hopefully replacing or looking to replace Azpilicueta, Callum coming back. Even you don't think of him like this, but Christensen as well. The fact that we can have 5 to 6 academy graduates in this team going forward, for you as a fan, I mean, to me as a fan, even 12 months ago, that was a dream. That was so far from being a reality. Just your thoughts on that sort of almost Lampard come in now, and even the likes of Billy Gilmore, and really flipping the table. Do you think this can be something that it is realistic and long-term for Chelsea and can save Chelsea a lot of transfer money and really can work? What are your thoughts just generally on players we haven't touched on in terms of younger players breaking into that team?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, Ruben obviously is not youth anymore, but he's an academy graduate. So you can include him in that type of a conversation. So when you're talking about Ruben and you're talking about HUDSON-ODOI and Reece James and Mason Mount, that's a core of 4. I'm sorry, throw Tammy Abraham in there. I mean, I always have put him a little tier below, but he's an academy graduate, obviously, and he's doing well. So, yeah, throw him in there. That's a core of 5 right there. And if those 5 players were anywhere else, let's say they were in Ligue 1 doing well, or the Eredivisie, or the Bundesliga, and they were doing well, all Chelsea fans would be drooling for Chelsea to acquire those players. But the added benefit you have here is they're not anywhere else. They're at Chelsea. They've been at Chelsea for a long, long time. All those guys since they were kids, right? Your Gilmore and your Ampadu, no. But those guys, they are true Blues, okay? And they know each other. They know each other's style. Jody Morris knows them and their style. So they want to make it here as well, which is hugely, hugely important. I mean, how about last season where every time Sarri complained that he couldn't motivate his players, and I'm not coming down on Sarri on this one, didn't every Chelsea fan say, we're so sick of players who won't play for the badge. We want players who understand what it means to play for Chelsea. Everyone said that. Even anti-youth people said they wanted players who knew what it meant to play for Chelsea. Now you have at least 5 of them ready to play for Chelsea and fight for Chelsea, and they happen to have talent as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great thing. I think they can be a core. I think they can be a foundation. Like you said, I think they can save Chelsea a lot of transfer money that, let's be real, that's always just risky. Obviously, they'll still need to spend on transfers, but I think they can change their plan that way and either spend on a couple huge fish or spend in more depth areas. So you can do a lot if those 5 players are legitimate. But with those players, let's say them again. Tammy Abraham, Reece James, Callum Hudson-ODOI, Mason Mount, and Ruben Loftus-Cheek. They all have extraordinary talent, but I'm going to be a broken record here. I love all of their mentalities, and I'm going to break down really quickly each one of their mentalities and why I like them. We talked about Mount. His football IQ and his drive to play for Chelsea is second to none. Phenomenal. Done with Mount there. Reece James, his mentality is awesome. I mean, beyond awesome. So quiet off the pitch, who gives a damn, right? Nice guy, but quiet off the pitch. Even he says when he steps on the pitch, he's an absolute animal. He will, shout in a good way. He'll direct anyone, whether it's an older player, a younger player, an equal. He will direct, and he's a true leader on the pitch. He comes alive, and his football IQ is obviously through the roof as well. Has played like all over the pitch. His mentality, I think, is a 10 out of 10. Okay, Hudson-ODOI, a little bit different than Mount and Reece James, but what I love about Hudson-ODOI is he's so confident in himself, and I think people have realized that through the contract talks. He has so much confidence in his ability, and not in a snobby, obnoxious way. You speak to anybody who knows him, he's a really nice kid. He's very well spoken when he gets interviewed. I don't know if you remember when he was unfortunately subjected to all that racism in his first England start. He handled it brilliantly. I mean, he's apparently a very nice kid, but I like his mentality in terms of he's fearless, he's fiery, and he believes in himself. So another mentality that I think can take that talent and turn it into something. Tammy Abraham, come on. I mean, his mentality is awesome. His mentality might be better than his talent. He's got good talent, but it might be better than his talent. I mean, he's just, John Terry said it. I mean, when Abraham was a teenager, well, I mean, that wasn't that long ago, but when he was younger and it was Terry and Cahill as like the center back pairing, and Abraham came over from the academy to play against the senior players, they rolled their eyes because they knew he was going to give them just the hardest time ever. So Tammy's mentality, I think we all know, it's fantastic. And then Loftus-Cheek, he's the pioneer of all of them. How can we not love Loftus-Cheek's mentality, his loyalty to Chelsea, but also his ability to keep taking these injuries and just working harder to come back, and clearly a nice guy as well. So, Daniel, that was a long-winded way of saying they're all potentially generational talents. You could argue about Tammy maybe. Some will argue about if Mason is. I won't, obviously. But they all have very good talent. But their mentalities are just as good, if not better. And that's why I'm so loud and obnoxious about all of them. So I'm so excited that they all potentially can become regulars this season, but foundational pieces moving forward. So that's why I think I'm a little more patient than I normally would be. If this was just senior players who really were okay on their day and then could disappear, this would be horrible. Even though I love Lampard, I wouldn't be able to stomach this. But think about what I just said. There's a lot to look at and grasp onto.
I'm very ready now for a change. I'm very ready now for, at the top of the English game now, when you look at who's succeeding, it's clubs, especially I think Liverpool's probably a better example of a long-term project, believing in a system, trusting a manager. These are all things now that I think Chelsea have to do. I think that it's hopefully the transfer ban and it's a nice set of circumstances, a blessing in disguise, if you will, that these things have come into play and allowed Lampard, a young manager, to break that glass ceiling which has been there for a very long time. And it's good to see that maybe this is a real big turning point for the better, really, at Chelsea, that we can look forward to a new era, as we've been speaking about. So definitely, before we wrap up now, I just want to get your ambitions for the season, I guess, or just thoughts about the season, how it's gone so far. We've got a really tricky week coming up with Wolves, Valencia and Liverpool. How do you think it's going to go? What are your sort of expectations for it? And what do you think about the rest of the season, really?
Yeah, so those three games, those are all going to be tough. I mean, Wolves, I'm now a little extra nervous on. Seems like Emerson's not badly injured. Obviously, another reason why I hate the international break, but it just seems like he's probably doubtful for Saturday. I don't have any inside info, but just the fact that he had to come off and it still was early on in the season, you would assume they wouldn't rush him like that. So Alonso potentially against Wolves is terrifying. So, I mean, I hate to say this, but I still think getting a point at Wolves wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I want 3 points, trust me, and I'm sick of the draws, but just can't lose that game. So I don't know. The next three games could be rough. Liverpool is going to be very challenging. But the reason why it could be rough is let's say Hudson-ODOI isn't available for Wolves on Saturday because he plays that development squad game on Friday, and I assume Reece James will too. We don't have these players back yet fully, so you could still see the team we've seen so far with maybe more William and more Alonso. So it's a little bit of a tease because we've been talking about after the international break, Hudson-ODOI, Reece James, and Loftus-Cheek not too long after that. Rudiger, of course, as well with Hudson-ODOI. So, I think there's better days ahead. I don't know if those better days are those next 3 games. Although Valencia, I expect 3 points against. I do. No offense to them. But overall, ambition for the season. I have said 4th to 7th all along for Chelsea. I'm sticking by it. 4th to 6th is what I obviously really hope happens. 4th would be phenomenal, but I'll take 6th because I think that it won't just be your average 6th place finish. 7th would suck, but I'm kind of predicting 4th to 7th. I don't think it'll be worse than that. I don't, assuming, it doesn't become injury FC again once all those players are back. But I think more importantly, I want Chelsea to get past the group stage. I want them to get out of their group and get on to the next stage in the Champions League, because that draw was not the easiest in the world, but not the hardest in the world, obviously. I mean, Valencia, not great, but they're at least a team that, we've known of for, year in, year out, but I don't view them as that dangerous. Ajax, that's going to be fun, but they don't have De Ligt or De Jong anymore. So once again, it's not like Ajax of last season. And Lille, no Nicolas Pepe, no Eden Hazard, so I think that was kind of the perfect draw where Chelsea can feel good if they get past them, considering Chelsea's squad, but they should get past them. So I want that, bare minimum. So I want 4th to 7th. I want Chelsea to get past at least the group stage in the Champions League. And then with FA and the League Cup, do well in one of them and maybe win one of them, because if we love our youth so much, maybe Lampard will, I don't know how things will go. Maybe the youth players will be so important, they'll be catered more in the Premier League games. I don't know. But with that depth of having those youth players, I would expect that they would do well in at least one of those competitions, and I want them to. So maybe realistically, win the damn Carabao Cup. It's the least of the 4, but win it. Why not? And I think Lampard actually can profile well as a good tournament manager. So I don't want them to obviously embarrass themselves in any of those 4 competitions. I don't think they should. And if they do, I'll be disappointed. And I'll say it's probably they underachieved. But if they can get 4th to 7th, they can get past the group stage in Champions League and do well in one of the FA Cup or Carabao Cup, I think that's a good season considering the context. And I think, once again, just to add on this asterisk, I think if those things happen, I think youth players will be a major reason why they did happen. So, Daniel, that will make it that much more acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think winning one of those domestic cups, I think, would be brilliant. And there's a feeling with Lampard that everything can and will mean more with him as manager, because of course, his connection to the club, and especially just, you think of him lifting a trophy and Mason being there and Tammy and Ruben and all of the players at Wembley. In the past, you would have said for Chelsea just to win a League Cup would be seen as an underachievement. But I think this year, for me, it's and as you expressed as well, I think it's the learning experience for a lot of these players that I think is going to be so beneficial. That Champions League group, I think, is perfect in terms of we haven't got a giant in there, but we've got experienced teams within the group who have played in Champions League football. Ajax were tactically one of the best teams set up in that knockout stage last year. They turned over some brilliant teams, and even though they've lost key players, I still think they're going to be a challenge. But that is for Lampard and for his players to learn from those experiences, and hopefully Lampard will be able to implement those things later down the line. Of course, that's what we want as fans, that there is going to be that sign of improvement. And I think that those, if as you said earlier, if we can get some big wins, if that's a European night, if that's a win against Liverpool, an unexpected win here and there, a win against City, those are the things that fans are going to cling on to and can take into next season. A bit like Klopp's first season at Liverpool, he was able to get some big moments under his belt, and that really helped forge a connection with the fan base. And I think that's hopefully what Lampard and his players can do. But thank you, Alex, so much for coming on today. Wonderful discussion. Hopefully do it again sometime in the future. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to self-plug, just so you can wherever people can find you online. Shout out your podcast, your YouTube channel. Don't want to get any of it wrong, so I'll give you the floor to self-promote.
Appreciate it. So yeah, on Twitter at Alex Goldberg _ proceed with caution there. YouTube channel. Right now I'm just doing match reviews. I will do more videos, but personal life is busy for a good reason. So you can at least just count on the match reviews on YouTube. So the YouTube channel is called The Byline. But the thing that I'm putting constant work into is my podcast called The Byline Podcast, and try to always get out 2 episodes a week and really just have a vast array of guests ranging from players, parents of players, journalists, commentators, Twitter personalities. So I try to really kind of cover all the bases. Next episode, I'm having on Rangers first team coach Michael Beale, but he also was a Chelsea youth coach for a long time. He coached and developed Mason Mount when he was a lot younger and other players that people would know. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, it's called the Byline Podcast. It's on Patreon, but really if you go onto my Twitter, you'll find it. It's going to be there in plain sight. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Yeah, definitely go and support Alex there. And I think the amount of guests you've got on that podcast is only going to continue to grow. And I think you're a really positive voice within the Chelsea community as well, which is what we need more of. And definitely, I just wish you all the best and luck of improving that and continuing to grow as a Chelsea community. It seems online continues to grow, especially with creators at the moment. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy the video, hit that subscribe button and also the notification bell to never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter at Son of Chelsea, and I'll see you again.